Okay. We're on bottom of 76A. Quick review. The Mishnah talks according to Reb Shimon about someone who steals a sacrifice. He steals kachim. Reb Shimon makes the following distinction: if the kachim that you steal, the animal that the sacrifice you stole, was something that the owner has responsibility for, meaning, like we said yesterday, there's two ways you can donate a sacrifice. One is to donate it, but donating this specific sacrifice, you say this animal should be an oila. The other way to do it is to say, I accept on myself to bring an oila, and that's an oila, obviously is an example of a sacrifice, and this animal should be the relevant, should be the example. Now, in the first scenario where you give this animal, there's no responsibility. If the animal dies or it's lost or stolen, you don't bring a new animal. However, in the second scenario, in the scenario where you accept on yourself to bring a sacrifice, so then if the animal is lost or stolen, you have to bring a new one. Says Reb Shimon that if you steal an animal where the owner would be otherwise responsible for it, this is called davar agarim l'mammon. This is something that causes money, and therefore, if you steal it, you have to pay potentially up to $1 of hay. If you steal a sheep, 4. If you steal an ox, 5. Okay, now there's just one technical problem. According to Reb Shimon, we have to have a shchita re'uya. That means an appropriate slaughter, a slaughter such that it would be permitted to consume the animal. And the problem is, obviously, if you have a sacrifice, presumably you're slaughtering it outside the temple. You're slaughtering it outside the temple. Then it becomes what we call shchutei chutz. Shchutei chutz means a sacrifice brought outside the temple, obviously at a time where that's prohibited. And the animal is prohibited. The animal would never be allowed to be eaten. So how do we have it, according to Reb Shimon, that you can steal a sacrifice and slaughter it, and it should still be called a shchita re'uya, an appropriate slaughter? So that takes us to the bottom of 76A. 1 second. Okay, and that's 5 lines in the bottom. Second word on the line. Ki aser Rav Dimi Amar Rav Yechanan. Rav Dimi says in the name of Rav Yechanan, b'sheichet tamimim mi bifnim. Simple solution. L'shem ba'alam. Very simple solution. You slaughter the animal inside the temple with the intention that the owner should benefit from the animal. Well, the answer, even if so now there's a technical problem here, which is even if the wrong guy slaughters it, meaning the thief in this case slaughters an animal with the intention that the original person he stole it from should have an atonement. If that's the case, the original person does have an atonement. If he has an atonement, then guess what? He's fulfilled his obligation to bring a sacrifice. So if he's fulfilled his obligation to bring a sacrifice, we have another problem. Effectively, you return the animal by accomplishing his sacrifice, which exempts him from responsibility. He no longer needs to bring a new sacrifice because you brought it for him. So the Gemara says, the blood was spilled out. So now this means that the main quote unquote atonement, the validation of a sacrifice, happens when the blood is poured on the altar. In this case, the blood got poured out before it went to the altar, so the owner is still responsible to bring a new carbon. That was, keep in mind the names here. That was Rav Dimi in the name of Rabbi Yechanan. And now we get to Ravin in the name of Rabbi Yechanan. Very simple. He brought a kosher sacrifice, but he did not have in mind that this should fulfill the obligation of the original owner. And therefore, the original owner is still obligated to bring a new sacrifice. And because he's obligated to bring a new sacrifice, therefore, it's a davar agarim l'mammon. It causes financial difference, and we have to. The robber has to pay up to 4 and 5. Okay, now both examples of Rabbi Yechanan where you slaughtered the animal, kosher animal, in the temple. So the slaughtering was kosher. Afterwards, something got messed. So according to one scenario, it was just not with the right intention for the original owner, which means the animal is kosher. The sacrifice is kosher. You can eat the sacrifice, but the original owner does not fulfill his obligation, or the blood spilled out. Okay, and now we get to Rish Lakish. Rish Lakish Amar b'sheichet bali mumin b'chutz. He slaughtered an animal that got a mum. A mum is a blemish, one of the various blemishes that invalidates an animal for sacrifice. Okay, Toiba, Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Yechanan. Rabbi Lazar has the following question to Rabbi Yechanan and also to Rish Lakish. He says, Shchita materes, valaz rika materes. You have a sacrifice. What makes the sacrifice permitted to be in? Let's say, for example, the sacrifice was a shlomim or it was a chatas, and it was being eaten by the kohen. What permits the sacrifice to be eaten? The fact that the blood was poured on the altar. So in this case, actually, the shchita is not a shchita reuya. The slaughtering does not permit the animal because you need to engage in the act of zrika, pouring the blood on the altar. So therefore, anytime you slaughter a sacrifice inside the temple, you never have a shchita reuya. You never have a slaughter that permits the animal to be in, because the animal always requires zrika, pouring the blood on the altar. Zrika, by the way, literally means to throw. So, and that's probably the more correct terminology. The blood was thrown on the altar in an upward motion. Okay, the Rish Lakish, according to Rish Lakish, you slaughter the animal outside. Shchita materes, is it the slaughtering that permits the animal to be eaten? In other words, the animal is a blemished animal. We'll soon get to the specifics about when the blemish happened, before the sacrifice or afterwards. We'll get to it. Velopedia materes, it's redemption that permits the animal, because you need to redeem the animal from its sanctity, then you could eat it. It's not the slaughtering that permits the animal, it's the redemption. So the Gemara says, Ishtamitse hoder of Shimon. Okay, so the simple resolution is very simple. In general, because the animal is otherwise eligible for zrika, for pouring the blood, because the shchita was a kosher shchita, and because the animal is otherwise eligible for redemption, because it was a blemished animal, we consider the redemption and the zrika, the pouring of the blood on the altar, to have already happened. And therefore, we consider the slaughtering as if we consider the slaughtering to be the permitting act, because we view the other acts as having already occurred, because they're most likely to occur. The Tanya we learned. Shimon Omer, and then now we go through the idea of kol omed liftos and kol omed lizrik. So first kol omed lizrik. The Tanya we learned. Let's explain. What does this mean? Shimon Omer, yesh noiser shehu metame tumas eichlin, v'yesh noiser she'eni metame tumas eichlin. Okay, noiser is the leftovers of a sacrifice. So sacrifice has a window in which it can be brought. In other words, you slaughter the animal and you pour the blood on the altar. There's a window of time now in which you can eat this. You can eat the sacrifice. If the sacrifice is the lighter level of kachim, what we call kachim kalam, that window is 2 days and 1 night, the night in between. So let's say you would slaughter an animal today, which is Thursday. You'd be able to eat it Thursday night, and Friday. Friday at sundown, the whole sacrifice becomes nicer. You can no longer consume it. If the animal was a chatos, it was a kachim that is consumed, like a chatos and an asham, not like an oila, because an oila completely goes to God. There's no consumption. So if, let's say, it was a chatos, then you would eat it for just today. At Thursday sundown, the animal becomes prohibited. It becomes nicer. Okay, so there are 2 types of nicer. Yesh nicer shemitame tumas eichlin, yesh nicer she'eni mitame tumas eichlin. Okay, so now, in order for nicer, it does create a tumah, but that tumah is conditional to the fact that this animal was able to be eaten. If it was able to be eaten, then the nicer becomes tumah. If it's not eligible to be eaten, there's no tumah. And the reason for this is because it would be prohibited in hana and benefit, and Rav Shimon says there's no tumah there. I don't want to get into too complicated, into the exact nuances of it's not quite relevant to Bava Kamma, but the basics here is that it needs to be eligible to be eaten in order for there to be tumah. Okay, Kate said, how is this possible? Lon lefnei zrika ein metama tumas eichlin, la'achar zrika metama tumas eichlin. So if the animal, in other words, if the animal went overnight, so for example, the sacrifice, the portion of the sacrifice that goes to the altar, it must be done the day the animal was slaughtered. If it was done before zrika, then the animal is, if the sacrificial meat, let's say, the meat that was supposed to go on the altar was brought onto the altar, was left over, it was not brought on top of the altar before Zrika, meaning you slaughter the animal close to sundown. There was not enough time to do Zrika, to pour the blood on the altar. And then there was not enough time to pour the blood on the altar. And then the meat now is left over. The meat is left overnight. It's now invalid. This meat is, if the Zrika was not done, the meat is not tamei. If the Zrika was done, the meat is tamei. Presumably that's because the Zrika permits the meat to be eaten or to be brought as a sacrifice. And therefore, once the Zrika is done, the meat that's left over will become tamei. Okay, but actually, the kaim alone we understand from this brisa, that actually the Zrika doesn't actually have to be done. What does this mean? If the Zrika was able to be done, then we consider the meat to have tumah. If the Zrika was not able to be done, the meat does not have tumah. Let's explain. Before it was possible to pour the blood on the altar. How is that possible? You slaughter the animal next to sundown, around sundown, just before sundown, and there was not enough time to pour the blood on the altar. Now the meat is left overnight. The meat is invalid, and there is no tumah. The reason why there's no tumah is because the animal was never eligible to be eaten, because Zrika was not possible. There's no tumah. After it was possible to do Zrika, what does that mean? It was done 10 minutes before Shkia. You had enough time to pour the blood on the altar. Even if you did not pour the blood on the altar, even if you didn't, and the animal's left overnight, there is tumah. Why? Because of this concept. There is tumah. Why is this? Because Zrika was possible, we consider the Zrika to have already happened, as if the Zrika already happened, and we consider the meat eligible to be eaten. Okay, and that is the first point. The concept is because Zrika is likely and eligible, therefore we consider the Zrika to have already happened with regard to any law that pertains to after that requires a Zrika. Zrika again is pouring the blood on the altar. Now we get to the second category. Anything that's able to be redeemed, it says we see it as if it was redeemed. The Tanya we learned. Reb Shimon says, we're on turning now the page of Ayin Vavam and Beis 76b. Now we're on 77a. Tanya Reb Shimon says, okay, the para aduma, this is the red heifer. One second. Yeah, the meat, the flesh of the animal has tumas eichlin. It has the ability to make food tamei. Since the animal was kosher at some point in time, we'll explain. Turn the page now on 77b. Shlakish explained. Reb Shimon explained. Shlakish explained this by saying that let's say we slaughter the para aduma and we prepare it to be burnt, and for some reason the sacrifice becomes invalid. Okay, I'm sorry. Now I'm sorry. Not only if the sacrifice becomes invalid, but even if the sacrifice remains valid, but we found a nicer red heifer, we stop the procedure, and we can redeem the red heifer that's on the altar, and we can eat it, and bring the new animal, the nicer animal. Okay, in essence, what are we saying here? We're saying because every par aduma is eligible for redemption between its slaughter and the moment that you burn it. If you find a nicer par aduma, a nicer red heifer, therefore it's eligible for redemption. Because it's eligible for redemption, we treat it as if it's already redeemed, and we say that the flesh of the animal would create tumah because the animal is eligible to be eaten. Alma kol oimed liftis kapod dami. We see from here that the concept of anything that's fit for redemption is as if it's redeemed. Okay, there are a few other technical components that I've sort of briefed over, but basically the idea is both for Shimon and both for Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan's, again, going back to the original Gemara. Rabbi Shimon says you steal a sacrifice, you slaughter it, you have to pay 4 and 5. If this is the type of sacrifice that can cause the owner financial loss, should the animal be lost or stolen. Now we had a technical problem with that, which was exactly how do you have a kosher slaughter of a sacrificial animal? So the Gemara has a few possibilities. Two possibilities that it was slaughtered in the temple, so it's actually a kosher sacrifice. But for whatever reason, the owner does not fulfill his obligation to bring the sacrifice. Either that's because the blood was never poured on the altar, or it was because he had the wrong intention. He slaughtered it without the intention of the original owner. And then we had Rish Lakish's opinion, the animal was a blemished animal, and it was slaughtered outside the temple, but that's acceptable. The Gemara asks, but according to Rabbi Yochanan, it's not the slaughter that permits the animal to be eaten, it's the zrika. And the Gemara's response is, because the animal was fit for pouring the blood on the altar, we consider therefore the slaughter to be an appropriate slaughter. And that's called the shchita ru'uya. Zrika. Zrika means to pour. It's a kachim term. We'll pull out of here in just a moment. We'll get back to Bava Kamma in a second. And Rish Lakish says that even if the balmum, the blemished animal, was not yet redeemed, it doesn't make a difference. Why? Because it's fit for redemption. Therefore, it's as if it's redeemed. Okay, so now we get back to that Gemara. I understand why Rabbi Yochanan rejects Rish Lakish to because Rabbi Yochanan would prefer not talking about blemished animals. Why doesn't Rish Lakish agree to Rabbi Yochanan? The animal was slaughtered into the temple. So okay, so Rish Lakish adds on another condition to be able to pay 4 and 5. This we haven't seen so far. What is this? Rish Lakish says that this animal must be eligible either for sale or for sacrifice, or for slaughter. Let's explain. Let's take an animal, a regular animal. You steal a regular animal. Can you sell it? Yeah. Can you slaughter it? Sure. Take a blemished animal. Can you sell it? Yes, because it could be redeemed. Can you slaughter it? Sure. Take a kachim animal. Can you slaughter it? Absolutely. Slaughter in the temple. Can you sell it? Of course not. You cannot sell it. If you can't sell it, says Rish Lakish, if an animal is not eligible to be sold, it's not eligible for slaughter either. Meaning, you're not eligible for the penalty of 4 and 5, which in order for that penalty to exist, it must be eligible for both possibilities, for the possibility of sale and the possibility of slaughter. Obviously, you can only do one of those, but it has to be eligible for both possibilities. These sacrifices, since if you sell them, the sale is not valid. If you slaughter them, you don't pay 4 and 5. And this goes in line with the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. The Itmar we learned, Hamoicher treifa, somebody who sells a treifa. A treifa is an animal that is not kosher. Why isn't it kosher? Let's say it has a hole in the lungs, big hole in the lungs. It's going to die pretty soon. Okay, now this is a prime animal. Is this animal eligible for slaughter? No, because slaughtering it does not permit the animal. Is it eligible for sale? Why not? Of course, you could sell it. So, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Yochanan says you sell a treifa, chayiv, you're liable. For Rish Lakish or partner, Rish Lakish says you're exempt. Rabbi Yochanan chayiv, alfagav delesa betficha isa mechira. While it's true you can't slaughter a treifa, again an animal that cannot live 12 months, for example, it has a hole in the lungs. Isa b'mechira, you can sell it. Rish Lakish says partner, you're exempt. Why? Kiven delesa betficha, since you cannot slaughter the animal, meaning you could slaughter it, obviously, physically, but that slaughter does not constitute a valid ritual slaughter. It doesn't permit the animal to be eaten. You cannot sell it either. Okay. Okay, so I have to give you a little bit of background here. This is pardon my own ignorance. I was messing around with Google and Wikipedia last night to try to figure it out. It's interesting that there's an animal called a geep and a shoat. You heard of such an animal?
A geep?
A geep and a shoat. A geep is a graft between a male goat and a female sheep. Now, apparently, geeps, although they can occur naturally and they're quite unusual, they're more common than shoats, which is the opposite. A shoat is a male sheep and a female goat, and those apparently are much more rare. When we talk about we'll talk about these animals here. When we call typically speaking, there's a Torah concept called klayim. Klayim is a mixture. But in this context, klayim is an animal that is, in our specific Gemara, klayim is a geep. It's a male goat with a female sheep. And there's another animal called a nidme. A nidme is the opposite. That's a shoat. If anyone curious enough, if anyone's familiar with these terms, a geep and a shoat. I've never heard these terms before. A shoat is a rear one that's called a nidme, and hopefully we'll get to it today. In typical Talmudical fashion, we'll talk about animals that cannot exist, and the Gemara will ask the question that can't exist, and the Gemara will resolve, well, there is one possibility where it could exist. Okay.
Can I do sacrifices?
We'll get to it. Okay. Okay, so now let's see the brayso. Rabbi Yochanan adds a question to Rabbi Shimon Lakish. Ganav klayim. He steals a geep. And like most hybrids, a geep is infertile. Ganav klayim b'tafcha, and you slaughtered it. Okay, or you stole a treifa. A treifa is a regular animal, can't live for 12 months. Umachra, and you sold it. Mishalam tashlum bavakamma, you pay 4 or 5. My law of Reb Shimon. This must be Reb Shimon. Okay, and now you can the geep, you can either sell it or slaughter it. However, the treifa you must slaughter. Why? Because you must sell because obviously you can't slaughter it. Says Rabbi Yochanan. 1 second. My law of Reb Shimon. Alma afagav delesa b'tficha isa mechira, and this must be the opinion of Reb Shimon. Okay, why is it Reb Shimon's opinion? Because a court. What's it called? The reason why it must be Rav Shimon is as follows, because according to the rabbis, the shechita, the slaughter, doesn't actually have to be a valid slaughter. That's why if you have a treifa, a treifa is again an animal can't live 12 months. A treifa, according to the rabbis, you could slaughter it, and you could, and that makes you liable for dalad v'hei 4 and 5, because the rabbis do not require you to do not require the slaughter to be a ritually valid slaughter. So it must be Reb Shimon's opinion. And yet Reb Shimon says that a treifa can be sold. Why? Because Reb Shimon does not require the animal be able to be either both sold or slaughtered. Either or is sufficient. And this is the opposite opinion of Rish Lakish. Rish Lakish would say to you, because a treifa can't be slaughtered, it can't be sold either. Meaning, selling or slaughtering the animal does not make you liable for dalad v'hei, for 4 and 5. Together on the question? So Amar Lei, so Rish Lakish should respond, Loi, not necessarily. Rabbana, this is the rabbi's opinion. I Rabbana on treifa mechira isa b'svicha lasa. A treifa you can either sell or you can slaughter it. Can't you sell it? Meaning you could sell it. It's a rhetorical question. Of course you could sell. Of course you can slaughter it, because the slaughter does not need to be ritually valid according to the rabbis. They reject the concept of what Reb Shimon called shchita ru'uya, an appropriate slaughter. Velamai, it must be Reb Shimon. The Gemara says, hold on. But according to Reb Shimon, klayim, again, that's the geep. Klayim b'tvicha isab mechira lasa. Klayim is only relevant to tvicha, to slaughter, and not to mechira, to selling. No, rhetorically. Meaning, why does Reb Shimon give an example of a geep being slaughtered and not being sold? It could be both. Slaughter or sell it. Elatona tvicha v'hoidila mechira. Rather, the brayso is referring to both. The brayso gives an example of slaughter, but it really means also selling. V'hoidila mechira, and also selling. Gives the example of elatona tvicha. When it talks about the geep, it talks about slaughtering it. V'hoidila mechira, but you could also sell it. And you're right, according to the Bryce is according to the rabbis. And according to the rabbis, you can not only can you sell a treifa, but you can also slaughter it. However, Rabbi Yochanan says that this is not a good response, and the reason is obvious. Hi, Mai. What comparison is this? I did tona seifa, the tona treifa b'choda, tona klayim b'choda. If you'll tell me, Bishlam Reb Shimon, you'll tell me that this price is Reb Shimon. Okay, fine. So therefore, there's two categories. The geep is in one category. There, it's slaughter or sell, and the treif is in its own category. Why? Because the treif, according to Reb Shimon, is only selling. You cannot slaughter a treifa. Obviously, you could slaughter a treifa, but if you slaughter it, you wouldn't pay $1 v'hei. But if it's the rabbi's opinion, it should be one long brisa. It shouldn't be two examples. It should be both examples, one after another. Meaning, gonav klayim utreifa. You stole either a geep or a treifa. If you sold it or slaughtered it, you pay 4 and 5. In other words, what do we have to say? A geep and you sold it and you slaughtered it. A treifa and you slaughtered it. I'm sorry, a treifa and you sold it. It could be a geep and a treifa. Either you sold it or you slaughtered it. That would make sense according to the rabbi's opinion, because according to the rabbis, you could slaughter a treifa and still pay $1 pay. According to Reb Shimon, it makes sense to put into two distinct categories, because a treifa is halachically distinct from a geep. Okay, and that concludes the Gemara. Now we get into a discussion about geeps. Now, by the way, if anyone's learned Mishnayos, I'm sure you have heard of the geep. It's in Becheres, but I've never finished Becheres. Okay. Where are we? Okay. And the Gemara says, Kasha, this question of Rabbi Yochanan remains difficult to Omer Shlokish. Now, Klayim, you can, a geep is an eligible candidate for paying 4 and 5. $1 v'hei. The Gemara says, Seksiv. It says you steal an ox or a sheep. A sheep is not a geep. Of Amarova, 1 second. We are in Ayin Zayin Base 77b. We're 2 lines above the wide lines. 1 second. Okay, Rava says, Rava says that there's a binyan av. In other words, since the Torah specifically mentions a sheep, this excludes, anytime the Torah says sheep, it excludes klayim. A geep is not included in the category of sheep. Well, if that's the case, then you wouldn't pay $1 v'hei on a geep. You only pay on an ox and a sheep.
What would you pay?
You pay kefil, like if you stole a horse or you stole any other animal, a goat, for example.
And that's in general because it can't be offered up as a sacrifice. I don't know it goes much deeper.
No. I don't know I don't know what the specific answer is, but let's get to it, because actually we'll have to. Obviously, a geep is included. We just said the Bryce says a geep is included. So shani hachadam akro oila rabbis saklayim, because it says shor oisa, an ox or a sheep. So the or is another possibility of sheep, which includes a geep. So the Gemara says, "V'kol oila rabbis." Every time the Torah says "or," is that inclusive? V'tanya, we find to the contrary. We find that the word "oy" or is actually restrictive. V'tanya, this is the restriction of waiting 8 days. A newborn cannot be brought as a sacrifice until it's at least 8 days old. V'tanya, the Brisa says, "Shor oy chesev." You have the complete verse is "Shor oy chesev ha'ez." So shor is an ox, chesev is a sheep, ez is a goat. So a sheep an ox or sheep or goat, right? 2 ors there. Ox or sheep or goat. Shor chesev prat l'klayim. It excludes a geep. Ayez prat l'nidma, or a goat that excludes the shot. That's the male sheep with the female goat. So actually, the word ay is exclusion. It's an exclusion. It's not inclusive. It's exclusive. It's only either an ox or a sheep or a goat. So in the laws of Daled V'Hei 4 and 5, we should say that it's an ox or a sheep and not a geep. So this is a major question. What is I? Is I inclusive or exclusive? And the simple answer is it depends on the context, right? You can get a little meme here of voting gay. Depends on the context. Depends on the context. Let's see what the context of the verse is. So let's take a look. Gabi Gneva, with regard to stealing, Dirsiv Shor Oisa. It says an ox or sheep. Okay, now, if you take a ox and a sheep, it's not possible for them to produce offspring together. From what I understand, it just doesn't work. You have to be, relatively speaking, the same genus in order for offspring to be possible. And evidently, this is well beyond my scope of knowledge, but apparently an ox and a sheep cannot interbreed. Okay, so therefore, obviously, there cannot be a hybrid ox-sheep. If there's no hybrid ox-sheep, I'll give you the honors of figuring out a name for that theoretical animal. So therefore, it's clear that a hybrid is not possible. It's necessarily excluded by reality. If that's the case, the word oy includes a different type of climb, not a hybrid between an ox and a. Not a hybrid between, Eric suggests, a shocks. Not a hybrid between an ox and a sheep, but a hybrid between a sheep and a goat. In other words, geep. So I is inclusive. Gabi kachim. Now, with regard to the laws of sacrifice, where you have to wait a minimum of 8 days to bring the sacrifice, and the Torah says, ox or sheep or goat. Now, a sheep and a goat do make hybrids. They make geeps and shotes. So the siv shor ve'etz. It is possible to produce an offspring, a hybrid. So if that's the case, oy lemayet. So therefore, oy is an exclusive category. In other words, because a kesev oy's, you can make a kesev a's combination, a geep or shot. In Hebrew, a climb or a nidma. So therefore, the word oy excludes a geep or shot. So Gemara says, hold on a second. That's only half the verse, right? The verse says ox or sheep or goat. Now it's true that the second half of the verse, sheep or goat, is a hybrid as possible. But the verse also says ox or sheep. Well, an ox sheep is not possible. That type of hybrid. And that's really Gemara's next question. It also says an ox or a sheep. You can't have the shocks hybrid. It's not possible. Okay. If that's the case, venirbi, so then I should be exclusive. I'm sorry, I should be inclusive because the hybrid ox sheep is not possible. So let's say that I includes an ox sheep. Okay, so the Gemara says, well, look at the end of the verse. Because the sheep goat is possible, so oy there is exclusive. So therefore, the oy of an ox sheep is also exclusive, and a goat, a shot, and a geep are eliminated. So Gemara says, well, maybe to the contrary. Adarabba, mida racial rabbis safe and amil rabbis, because the ox sheep is inclusive, because an ox sheep hybrid is not possible, so the oy should include it. So therefore, let's say that the sheep goat is also inclusive. So we should actually add the geep and the shot. If we'll say that we're trying to exclude, we need two exclusions. What, and I am not exactly sure, maybe I have to look in the article, maybe they explain this. I'm not exactly sure why this is the case, but it seems to be that the geep is more unusual than the shot. The geep, the climb, it is more logical to exclude climb than nidma. It's more logical to exclude a geep than a shot. I am not sure why. If that's the case, it makes sense why we need two verses to exclude. One excludes a geep, the other excludes a shot. But if we'll say that a ox hybrid includes a shot, includes a geep, for sure the shot is included. So I wouldn't need two different inclusionary terms. Even though a shot is excluded, a geep is excluded, I would need a second verse to exclude it, to exclude a shot. I would not need two examples of inclusionary terms. Why? Because if the ox sheep is impossible, therefore we basically open the door to any type of hybrids that's in the category of sheep or goats. 1 second. Obviously, if climb is included, certainly, if climb, meaning a geep is included, certainly a shot should be included as well. Okay. Now I have to go to work a little bit early, so stop here. And tomorrow we'll continue a discussion about some interesting chimeras and other forms of hybrids. Okay. Have a great day.